Secretary said that there's a possibility we might have to have enlistment in the UK for young people. A mere 27% of young people said they would be willing to be enlisted to fight for their country. These, I don't need to tell you, are not good results. And they bring a whole set of questions beneath them, some of which I wrote about in my last book. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, at any rate, that a lot of young Americans wouldn't be willing to fight for their country if they've been told from the cradle that their country was rotten from birth and had nothing going for it other than slavery.
Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel, the TV reality show. Yesterday I'll be checking on Douglas Murray, choose life, not the dead courts. What could that be? Choose life, not the dead courts. Alright, I haven't watched this video before, but I want us to watch it together. Let's
Well, thank you so much, Ayan. It's such a pleasure being friends with Ayan, and a great honor, and it's a great honor to me that you've introduced me here tonight. I'm slightly nervous because I'm not used to friendly crowds. I think it's a first, so please bear with me if I stutter or lose my train of thought. I'd like to thank Paul Singer, the chairman of the Manhattan Institute, Rehan Salam, the president, and also the great pleasure of being a co-honoree with Ross Perot Jr. It's my view that none of us come into the world fully formed by any means. And I wanted also to take a moment to mention the fact that there are many people in this room here tonight who've helped to form me. And you all know who you are, and I'm not going to name names or hold anyone personally responsible, but I'm also very deeply honored to receive this award because looking at the list of previous honorees, they include so many other people who I credit with part of my intellectual evolution, not least Daniel Patrick Moynihan, William F. Buckley, and Tom Wolfe. But I'd also like, I open my remarks to cite a fellow émigré writer to this city who's no longer with us, but made a huge impression on me, and I know Ayan had the enormous honor of meeting. And that's the great Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci. I mention her because she wrote a great book about the war in Vietnam called Nothing and Our Men. And it starts with one of the best lines that I know in any book. It opens with her niece, her young child niece, asking her a question. The question is, life, what is it, Oriana? And the next sentence is, she says, the next morning, I went to Vietnam to find out. Now, it seems to me that the nature of being a writer is to get to the essence of things, to get to the nature of things, to try to work out life in its totality, whether that's, as I've done recently, writing about the fentanyl epidemic in this country and all of the monstrous things that come from it, or from the many war zones I've reported from. The purpose, I suppose, is to try to get to the truth. And the truth is not just an abstract thing, but specifically a truth about ourselves as human beings. And I suppose in that case, it's inevitable that a writer would be drawn to war, because war is in some ways the ultimate subject, because it shows us, human beings, at our very worst and also at our very best. A couple of years ago, I was reporting from Ukraine with the Ukrainian armed forces as they were taking territory back, briefly, all too briefly, from the Russian advance. I always think of the woman, I wrote about her in my column in the New York Post. I always think of the woman of 28, beautiful blonde woman, I met at the very front line. It was in the cold of November, and she had given birth to her first child the month before the Russians invaded. And she told me when I said, "What did you do?" She said, "I gave my child to my mother in Kiev, and I haven't seen her since." There's no rotation. There's no rotation. We don't have the luxury of rotation in the army at the moment. I think of all of the people I've seen in Iraq, Ukraine, northern Nigeria, where the Christians are under such terrible and almost ignored persecution, and for many other places. But I've never seen as much of the best and the worst of humankind as I have in the past 6 months in Israel and Gaza. I was here in New York on the 7th of October, and on the 8th of October I went down to Times Square, and there were these men and women waving signs celebrating the massacre of the previous day. They weren't calling for a two-state solution. They weren't saying we'd awfully like to do some borderline territory swaps in the West Bank. No, it was all celebrating the massacre. And some of them were doing it, and they were holding these signs in Times Square, by any means necessary, at a time when we already knew what those means included, and in fact when the massacre was still going on. And I thought then, and I said this in the Post, I thought then that a couple of things were obvious. The first is I had to get to Israel as soon as I could. The second was that we were going to see a kind of Holocaust denialism in real time, and therefore I thought I should see with my own eyes everything that had happened, everything I could see. And the third was that I noticed already what I said a couple of days after the 7th. I said, there are some times in your life when a flare goes up and everybody can be seen precisely where they're standing. And that seemed to me to be exactly what happened. I went straight to the sites of the massacres, to the hospitals where the wounded were recovering. I won't give you all of the, or even any of the terrible stories you can hear from there. I joined the experts in the I joined the pathologists in the morgues of Tel Aviv as they were trying to identify the dead. An unbelievable task, which they do with extraordinary delicacy and religiosity, actually. I spent a lot of time with the families of the kidnapped, and with the survivors of the Nova Party. But I also had the great opportunity to witness firsthand Israel's response, because unlike some countries today, Israel doesn't just sit back with equanimity when it's attacked, much as some of the world would like it to do so. One of the fences that the terrorists broke into on the 7th, and I thought immediately as well after the 7th, people aren't going to realize the scale of this. This was a 4,000-person battalion-sized terrorist attack that aimed to go all the way up to the center of the country. I felt rather proud, actually, to go back through that fence with the IDF when they were going into Gaza in search of the hostages. I saw the tunnel networks that Hamas has spent all these years building with your money and mine. I have a friend from the British Army, Colonel Richard Kemp, and one day we were standing underneath one of the tunnels that Sinwar had built, in which he's videoed going through. This is the mastermind of the 7th. And I said to Richard, who like me is a fan of dark humor, I said, this is about the size and width of the London Underground. And he said, yeah, and I hear it's even longer than the London Underground. I had the opportunity to say, and I think it's rather better run. But it was, I suppose I can say, as much as any person could, that I saw it all.
At this point, I
And on
would
the
say
day I
it
left
is
Israel
not
a few
only
days
you
ago, I
alone.
was the first person allowed in to
Yes,
see the
come to the northern
Hamas
part of
terrorists
Nigeria.
who'd committed the
Violent.
atrocities of the 7th in the prison
Violent.
cells in which they're
Then you will
held.
see Boko
I
Haram,
mention all
Muslim.
of this really to
ICC,
say, what do I
Muslim.
make of all
ASWA,
this?
West Africa, Muslim. All kinds
Let's say
of
the first thing
terrorism
I
happening
would
in
like to do is
Nigeria.
something
You
even
will see
more
them
heretical than what
in any
Paul
part.
Singer did earlier.
And sometimes I
I'm
wonder
going to
why.
quote scripture.
Okay, I was even thinking that it is only
I think
Africa that
often
has
of
that
the line
mentality
from
of
Deuteronomy,
you have crossed a
where
red
God
line.
says,
It
I've
is a
set before you
blasphemy.
life
Every
and
little thing you
death,
say, it is a blasphemy.
blessing and
And I was
cursing.
even thinking that it is only
Therefore
Africa,
choose
but I can
life,
see that
that
it
you
is
and your
also in
descendants
you.
might
And I
live.
can tell you that
And I think
if
also of the
there will
psalmist who
be a
said,
religion tolerance,
I
there
shall
will be
not
peace.
die,
What
but I shall
Christianity
live.
tolerance, Muslim cannot tolerate
Because
it.
when I think
I
of
don't
the
know why.
7th now, I
don't
don't
know
only
why.
think of the victims.
Every little thing they
I
will kill
think
you
of
and
the
say that you are
extraordinary heroes. And I want to
you
mention
blasphemy.
them to
It is a
you
blasphemy
above all.
to do this, to take
There's
alcohol,
a young man
to
who's
do
a
this,
friend of
to
mine,
do.
in his 30s.
Even
On the
to
morning of the
eat.
7th, he woke up in Jerusalem,
So
realized
guys,
the
I don't know.
seriousness of
And
what
then
was going
anybody
on,
help me
got into his
and
car, drove
tell me
south,
if
collected some
that is
guns,
how
left a farewell message to
Muslim
his
is like.
children
Is it
and
the
his
way
wife
the
on
Prophet
his
Muhammad
phone.
was, or they
Got
are
a call from
teaching,
his
they
company
are giving
commander on the
Africans the
road
wrong
saying,
teaching,
you have to
or
come
something like
back to
that? But I
base
don't
in
know.
Jerusalem. And he
Let me
said,
know in the
no,
comment section. And don't
we're
forget to
needed
subscribe to my YouTube
south
channel
now.
for more videos like this.
And his
See you next
battalion
time.
commander said, are you defying an order? He said, yes, I'm defying an order. We're needed in the south. And he fought for the next 48 hours, and he survived. I think of my friend Moshe, who I've had the great good fortune of being with for many months. He's now my cameraman, or was from the beginning, and the first day we were together, we donned our battle armor and helmets, and on the Gaza border, and I noted that Moshe had a bullet mark down the top of his helmet, and he hadn't mentioned anything about it. I said, where's that from? And he explained that it was from the 7th. He, every Saturday, would go down to see a friend of his in Kfar Aza, also in the media, and he drove right into the middle of the firefight on the highway. He got out and he fought, and he killed 3 terrorists with his own gun that he carries with him, thank goodness. And he fought for the next 2 days. And he doesn't expect any applause from it or anything like that. Just did what he had to do. I think of the extraordinary Druze men who provided the food at the party, at the Nova party, and who I met a few months ago, some weeks after the atrocities, and who described to me not just what they'd seen at the party, which the world was already trying to deny, but what they'd done. And they didn't see themselves as heroes at all, but because they could understand Arabic, they saved so many young Jews that morning. And when I said to them, why, among other things, did you do it? They're proud Israelis, they're Druze. They said the Hamas hate us even more than they hate the Jews. I think of the Muslim doctor who Hamas held as a human shield at one point in the morning, and who, even after being wounded, saved the lives of other Israelis. I think of the extraordinary people of the United Hatzalah, sort of first responders unit. They all get an alert on their phone, and they all go off and address a car crash. And I spoke to the head of that organization in Jerusalem. He said, in 30 years of doing this job, the whole 30 years altogether wasn't like 1 minute that morning. The lights just went off everywhere. And I think of a young woman called Adi Baruch. She was 23, and I was with her family in December in Judea and Samaria. She was a beautiful girl, a photographer, and she decided she had to go and re-enlist after the 7th, and she did. Her parents begged her not to, but she said she had to. And she was killed on her first day by a rocket that landed on her in Sderot. But her parents shared with me the note that she'd left for them in case she didn't make it. And in it she said, among other things, how sorry she was. But she said, I wanted to live life, and now I want you to live it for me. I think, finally, of the extraordinary evening in November last year. I was at the Schneider Children's Hospital when the helicopters came, returning the first hostages, the first children who Hamas had stolen from their homes in the south. And we'd been waiting for them for 2 days. There were 2 days of thwarted exchanges where Hamas deliberately eked it out, more and more torture for the families. But when the helicopters emerged, there were 2 of them, and they emerged in the night sky, and the people of Tel Aviv realized what was happening, and every car stopped. I was standing right on the top of the hospital. Every single car in Tel Aviv stopped. And suddenly I noticed there was applause from the citizens, the Tel Avivians. And then there was singing all the way through the streets of Tel Aviv. And I said to my cameraman, what are they singing? And they were singing a song, Hevenu Shalom Aleichem, we brought you peace. And I learned afterwards that, speaking to the helicopter commander, that there was such intense competition among the helicopter pilots to have the good fortune, the honor of returning these children home. Now, there's millions of stories like this across Israel, absolutely millions. The country rings with them, it resounds with them. And it makes me think a lot about home, my home here in America, my home in the UK. There have been polls over the last couple of years asking Americans and British people, what would you do if your country was invaded? And a couple of years ago when Ukraine was invaded, there was a poll here in the US, and it found that I don't want to make a partisan point, but let me risk it. You might guess. It turned out that a minority of Democrat voters said they would stay and fight for their country. A slight majority of Republican voters said they would. But it ended up with only 52% of the American public saying that they would stay and fight. I assume the rest would hot-foot it to Canada, assuming that Canada wasn't the one invading, which is one of the very few things in geopolitics I like to hold. But when I looked at those polls, in the UK, there was an even worse one a few months ago. The pollsters asked young British people, when the Defence Secretary said that there's a possibility we might have to have enlistment in the UK for young people, a mere 27% of young people said they would be willing to be enlisted to fight for their country. These, I don't need to tell you, are not good results. And they bring a whole set of questions behind them, beneath them, some of which I wrote about in my last book. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, at any rate, that a lot of young Americans wouldn't be willing to fight for their country if they've been told from the cradle that their country was rotten from birth and had nothing going for it other than slavery, colonialism, and everything else. You've really got to miseducate Americans into this kind of self-loathing. But I compare this to what I've seen in the last 6 months, and actually a number of my readers and viewers have said to me in the last 6 months, you've changed, Douglas. And I sometimes ask them what it is they think, and they said, you've lost some of your pessimism. And I've said to them, that there's a reason for that. And the reason is what I've seen in the Israeli public. Because actually this wasn't theoretical. It wasn't a poll question. It wasn't some dolts on an American campus cosplaying being terrorists for the day. Their pathetic attempts to, what's the latest one? They're now in LA, they're doing call to prayers. There's a guy in New York who's got a belly button and a crop top, and at the beginning of this academic year, he was on camera calling for a climate emergency, and now he's for Hamas. And I suppose he's queers for Palestine and chickens for KFC and all that. And I would love to drop him into Gaza, although, as I've occasionally said, I'm not sure there are very many tall buildings to throw him off. But once they rebuild them, that guy will have about a day. He'll be introduced to the elevator fast, I reckon. One of the great things about Israel at the moment is, my friend Barry Weiss said when she arrived in February, she said, "Isn't it wonderful to be in a country where nobody gives a damn about woke?" I said, "It's so true. Nobody bothers about pronouns. Life is too serious. Reality is right in front of you." Now, it seems to me that there's a lesson for this, and it's not a lesson for Israel, it's a lesson for us, for you and me, for us if we are going to restore countries like Great Britain and the United States of America. You know, I spoke some months ago with an older guy in Tel Aviv who said to me, he'd fought in the 1967 and the 1973 wars, and he said, "I owe the younger generation in Israel an apology." He said, "I used to say they don't have it in them. They've become, they like partying. They like being on Instagram and TikTok." And he said, "I owe them an apology. They've been magnificent." And the thing is that perhaps it does require life to become serious again. Perhaps the students that we see at these destroyed universities, perhaps they just need a dose of reality someday. I always pray that that day in some ways never comes to them, because it'll be the biggest wake-up call anyone has ever had. But all I would say is that this country, Great Britain, should be so lucky as to have a young generation like that in Israel. They were weighed in the balance since October the 7th, and they've been found to be magnificent. And so what I wanted to say was, really in closing, is that question, I suppose, of Oriana Fallaci's. I wonder what I've learned about life. And I'm going to give you, I'm afraid, a circular definition. That life has to be fought for, and it has to be cherished. And that what Israel has been up against is not just a people of death, but a cult of death. A cult which wishes to annihilate an entire race, and which, after dealing with that race, has made very clear what it wants to do with Christians, everyone in Britain, everyone in America, and everyone else next. They don't hide it at all. And we're merely stupid in not believing them. And I suppose for those people in America who don't believe them, I'd say, slumber on as long as you can. I wanted, therefore, just to say, I want to thank the Manhattan Institute and you for this deep honor, but I want to dedicate it to the people of Israel of all ages, who in the face of absolute death cults, in the face of people who most people in this country have no idea of, can't imagine what these people are capable of, I want to dedicate my acceptance of this award to the people of Israel who in the face of death choose life. Thank you.
And I have a lot to say. Yes, actually, I have a lot to say, but I wouldn't have said anything right now because the video has not ended. Yes, because this is just part one, and before I can say anything, I have to watch all the video and analyze it on my own. Oh yes. What will you do? I want you to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that if I post the next video, you can be able to watch it. All right. See you in next video. Bye.